Wow, Independence Hall is beautiful. Oh, hey everybody. It's me, Mr. Barth. I'm here in Philadelphia at Independence Hall violating the stay-at-home orders, but it's for a good reason. It's for history. Hey, while I'm here at Independence Hall, why don't I talk about Unit 3 of APUSH? I could review it for us as we go from 1754 to 1800. This would be great. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Attached to the posting with this link to watch this video, there's a document called Just the Key Concepts. Click on that. It should look like something like this. And I'm going to go down to page 16, start at the 7 Years' War. So you should pause my video so you can get to here, to this point, 7 Years' War. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of basically just talk through these papers. This is kind of just like an outline that Mr. Keel, Mr. Thompson, and I use to figure out what we're going to teach. So this is what I'm going to use to kind of just review over this unit. I'm going to explain things more in detail. I won't be able to type on this or anything, I don't think, but I don't know, maybe I'll play around with like the draw button or something. Well, I guess maybe I can draw a little bit. Okay, anyway. So just a reminder that we have a Unit 3 online test to take at some point this week. It's on AP Classroom. Hopefully this can be helpful for that. And if you took it before this, hopefully this is just good review for you. Okay, so Unit 3, here we go. So 7 Years' War starts off with, we need to think about what America looks like, or what the North America looks like at this point. At this point, North America is controlled by 3 countries: Spain, France, and Great Britain. Great Britain is on the far eastern half of North America. France is in Canada, and Spain is in southwest United States, what is today United States. Let's see. So colonial rivalry intensified between Britain and France. This is especially going to happen as both the countries are going in and competing to work with Native Americans for the fur trade. British colonies are more people are coming into British colonies than people coming into French colonies. As more British subjects come into North America, they're threatening a lot of the trade networks that the French have developed with Native Americans, because Native Americans start then working with British. As this is happening, and this conflict over who's going to have control over North America, American Indians are continuing to lose more ground. They're continuing to lose more power, and as they do that, they're just trying to keep as much as they can by working with someone in power. So whether that's the French or the British. And so these are going to, this is basically going to lead to the French and the British increasing military presence in North America, and especially conflict over the land in what would be the Ohio River Valley. So just past the Appalachian Mountains, who's going to control that land specifically? And we don't need to know about the battles or anything like that, but basically the war takes place. It's the French and Indians versus the British and Indians. Indians are on both sides of the war. The war takes place over 7 years. That's why it's called the 7 Years' War. And eventually the British will win. Now, with the British winning this war, it's going to lead to huge debts. Great Britain spent a lot of money on on paying for this war. Wars are expensive anyway, but war is especially expensive when you have to ship all your soldiers and all your equipment and all your food across the ocean to North America. So they're going to need to raise revenue somehow to pay for all this fighting. Now, I'm down here at this point. As the war ends, now the French are completely gone from North America, pretty much. The British have control from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River. And they realize that past the Appalachian Mountains, it's very difficult to control the Native Americans there. And so, so Congress is going to pass, or sorry, Congress, Parliament is going to pass the Proclamation of 1763, right? Proclamation of 1763, which is going to stop the Appalachians. People cannot cross across the Appalachian Mountains. That was trying to be a no. They couldn't go across the Appalachian Mountains, and that's because the British didn't want to pay for all of the soldiers to protect civilians from the Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. But when they tried to do this is going to have a lot of colonial opposition. The colonies feel like, hey, we fought in this war, my friends and family died in this war, and you're taking away some of the important things that we wanted, that we fought for. Native Americans who are there are going to try to continue to work with Great Britain to try to get as best a situation as they can, try to continue to trade with them. And again, we're going to see that it's never going to work very well. Okay, so now we go down to page 17, taxation without representation. So this part, explain how British colonial policies regarding North America led to the Revolutionary War. Okay, so we've talked so far about how the British need to collect more money for the to pay off the French and Indian War. To do that, they're going to do a series of laws designed to make money. So we have things like the Sugar Act, the Molasses Act, the Stamp Act. Okay. And when they do this, it's going to unite the colonies in opposition to it. Let me just. So the colonists are very upset over what the British are doing. It's going to unite a lot of the colonists against this end of salutary neglect. That's not how you spell it. Remember, salutary neglect is the idea where the British make rules like the Navigation Acts, but they never really follow it. Now they actually are following their economic policies, and the smugglers and many of the colonists, especially in Boston, are mad. And so Bostonians are going to do things like boycotting. Oops. They're going to continue to smuggle. And new groups like the Sons of Liberty are going to protest. And they're arguing for the idea of no taxation without representation, because colonists are not represented in Parliament. They feel like they should not be taxed in the same way. They're okay with being taxed as long as they're going to be represented and they have a voice. However, in Parliament, they argue that colonists have virtual representation, meaning every politician in Parliament represents every subject of Great Britain. So the colonists argue that they have the rights of Englishmen. This is the beginning of ideas of Enlightenment. They realize they've had a long time of self-rule. You know, we talk about in town meetings in New England. People in, especially New England area, have a long history of self-rule, self-government, and this all feels like taking away those powers. So we have people like Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, people who are able to question what Parliament is doing, why it feels like they're taking away people's rights as Englishmen. And it's going to lead to a lot of popular movements where artisans and traders and everything will boycott and will take more economic action against Parliament and its agents. With all this happening, more British soldiers are going to be sent to North America, and when more soldiers come, it's going to lead to more conflict. This culminates in things like the Boston Massacre. And with the Boston Massacre, that's going to lead to the Parliament trying to have a tighter grip on the colonists and do things like the Declaratory Act, where they say Parliament can make any law they want, and the Tea Act that is going to levy whatever taxes it wishes on tea that the Americans eat and drink, or well, they don't eat that, but okay. So then moving down to page 18, Philosophical Foundations of the American Revolution. So you can see the learning objective for this part. Explain how and why colonial attitudes about government and the individual change in the years leading up to the American Revolution. So Enlightenment ideas and philosophy inspired many American political thinkers to emphasize individual talent over hereditary privilege, while religion strengthened Americans' views of themselves as a people blessed with liberty. So what this is saying with the Enlightenment ideas is that they're trying to go against what has been the predominant idea of thinking for the rights of people that has gone back since the Middle Ages, where the king has absolute rule, and that its subjects, the people, have to follow the king or follow the leader, maybe the feudal lord. And if they don't, they are violating God. And so that leaves little room for their rights until we get to the 1700s, when colonists are arguing for more rights for individuals, more rights for people, not just for a king. And so we see a lot of conflict between different groups of people when this happens. We've already seen it in the colonies with conflict between people living in the coast, who are typically more well off, people who live in the backcountry, who are typically less well off. And so there's conflict between those groups. There's conflict even within the coast of people who are working closely with Parliament and making a lot of money off the current system, and those who don't. And all of those have very different ideas for who can have power, who should have rights. Many of the colonists felt like they were not given the same amount of representation as someone who was in England. They want a small r Republican form of government. A Republican form is where you vote for representatives that go into Parliament or go into Congress and represent you. They feel like they don't have that. And so eventually when we get a little bit later, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the pamphlet that's going to get many Americans to think about independence, is going to encourage people to think about their rights differently. And then eventually the Declaration of Independence is going to not only be a breakup letter with Parliament between us and them, but also it's going to declare that we as individuals also have individual human rights. That it's not even rights of a British person because it goes beyond government. It's a right that we get just for being born. Okay. And we're not going to go to that part. Okay. So the American Revolution. Explain how various factors contributed to the American victory and revolution. Okay, so this is pretty small because they don't really talk about battles at all. So I'm going to very quickly go over parts of this. So if there's maybe a couple battles you need to know, there's Lexington and Concord as one of the first attacks taking place between British soldiers and Massachusetts colonial militia. As this happens, eventually we're going to have the Second Continental Congress. Okay, and they're going to try to seek their rights still early on in the conflict. Even after Lexington and Concord, they're not talking about independence. In fact, they're still talking about how they can gain peace and gain their rights as Englishmen again. It's not till the year 1776 when we have both Common Sense, that pamphlet we talked about earlier, and eventually more conflict between the British and Massachusetts militia that we eventually lead to the Declaration of Independence. Okay, with this Declaration of Independence, they're going to say that they are their own country and that any allegiances or ties to Great Britain is completely dissolved and absolved, and they get to create their own country. And when they do that, they're going to set up George Washington, and he already was at this point. George Washington is the leader of the Continental Army. You know, you don't really need to know too many battles. Like I said, you know, there's Washington crossing the Delaware. They're not going to ask about that. I doubt they'd ask about Valley Forge when Washington's trying to keep the army together in a very cold winter. Maybe the Battle of Saratoga, because after this battle, this convinces the French to side with the Americans in the war. And when they do this, it's going to help basically the Americans to surround the British at the Battle of Yorktown. And when they do that, the American soldiers are on land, they're surrounding the British General Cornwallis, and the ocean is the French fleet that's basically we're surrounding the soldiers there, the British soldiers, and Cornwallis surrenders. Now, when Cornwallis surrenders, there are still about 13,000 British soldiers in New York, but by this time, the war has been going on for 6-7 years now. People in Great Britain are sick of the war. They want it to be over with. And so they decide to end the war. And so they're going to sign, eventually, the Treaty of Paris. Okay. So there's some things about the war itself. Obviously, AP goes through it very quickly. I didn't mention the, before, just not knowing what was going to be on here, the Boston Tea Party. Remember, the Boston Tea Party was a protest against taxes on tea, because Parliament got rid of all the Stamp Act and Sugar Act and all that. They kept the Tea Act, and that's when they had the Boston Tea Party. And then Parliament knuckles down on the colonists. Okay, so that's the American Revolution. So how did the revolution affect society? With all this talk about freedom and representation in the colonies, it made it very clear that in the colonies there was a lot of inequality, there was a lot of non-representation. Obviously there is slavery in much of the colonies. And how can you argue, like in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, when there are hundreds of thousands of African Americans in slavery, right? It's pretty hypocritical. Or that, how are you going to argue the rights of people, but then deny that women have the ability to be a part of political or economic or social systems. So there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes in with this. For women, feeling like they were not given the same opportunity, there is some expanded roles. One of this is called Republican motherhood. So Republican motherhood is the idea that in this new country, women are in control of their families, or not in control of their families, but have a responsibility in their families to teach the values of the country, teach the values of liberty, teach the history of our country, and women are supposed to be kind of like the guiding light of a family. And so this becomes a very important part of women's roles in families and in society in the United States. When the United States does this, they declare independence, and we leave from Great Britain. This is going to inspire many future independence movements around the world. France will have their own revolution. killing everybody and beheading them. Haiti is going to throw off their colonial leaders. Many Latin American countries are going to do this. So this is going to have great effect on North and South America in the years to come. Okay. So the Articles of Confederation, the Articles are, it's a document setting up our government, and it's created in 1776. So as soon as we declare independence, we say, okay, we need to come up with a government, and so they create this Articles of Confederation. What that means is that it's a document. A confederation is loosely aligned or loosely connected states. So we have all these states, and they're loosely connected to each other. They don't want to have too powerful of a federal government, and so they're going to put a lot of power into state control rather than federal control. So they're going to do things like, in order to vote in many states, you have to own property. In order to become a citizen, you must own property. They're going to say, we don't want to have a president because that's too much like a king. So we're going to have the legislature, the Congress, they're going to have all the power of this new Articles of Confederation. However, with the Articles of Confederation, the whole point of it was to, see, Articles of Confederation, everything is about foreign. A lot of it is about foreign stuff. How are they going to do with war? How are they going to do with international trade? However, it doesn't have a lot of power with stuff inside the United States. If there's a problem in the United States, like interstate commerce, or if there's a rebellion in the United States, it doesn't have a lot of power to deal with those things because the Articles try to give a lot of power to individual states. And if individual states don't want to deal with something, it's very hard for the central government to do it. So an example of this is Shays' Rebellion. When people in Massachusetts lead a rebellion, they're going to take down the Massachusetts government. The Articles, it's too slow. The federal government doesn't have the power to go in and stop it. And luckily, it fades away. I'm pretty sure Daniel Shays dies during the middle of it. But when that happens, it just shows that the Articles of Confederation is not able to deal with problems quickly. It's very hard to get laws passed to the Articles of Confederation. You get to have I think it's a super majority of states to agree to something. In order to alter the Articles of Confederation, you need to get a unanimous amount of states to vote on a change, which is just going to be impossible. After the war and after we had this Articles of Confederation, settlers began to move across the Appalachian Mountains. Remember, that's what they really wanted. And so the one good thing that the Articles of Confederation do is it creates the Northwest Ordinance, which just gives a path to how to admit new states. It shows that they want to have public education in these states, and it also bans slavery in all these new territories. So this is going to be one good thing that comes out of the Articles of Confederation, that people are able to move west and to figure out how to create a new state. Okay. So next part's about the Constitutional Convention and ratification of the Constitution. So, like I said before, it became pretty quickly understood that that the Articles of Confederation were not working, and as this happens, leaders get together in Annapolis, Maryland, and they say, okay, the articles are not working. Let's change this up. But they realized that this is not going to work at all. And so they said, okay, let's meet together again in a year in Philadelphia, and we'll create the Constitution. They're going to come together in a constitutional convention, and they're going to compromise over different ideas in the Constitution. So what are the compromises? One was going to be, how are you going to represent people? So there was the Virginia Plan, which was about population. Let's have the most populous states have the most power in the new Congress, whereas the New Jersey Plan, or the small state plan, wanted to be equal representation. They said, okay, let's compromise. That's called the Great Compromise. And they're going to have the House of Representatives. It's going to be by population. They're going to have the Senate, which is going to be equal. And so these are going to make a bicameral, bi meaning two, a bicameral legislature. Both of these houses are part of Congress. So this bicameral legislature is going to be a part of the Great Compromise. Another conflict is going to be over the population of the House. What do you do with slaves? And so they're going to create what's called the 3/5 compromise, which means the population of slaves in the state are going to be counted as 3/5 towards the population that they normally would have. The new Congress is also going to regulate the slave trade. So it's eventually going to get rid of the international slave trade by the year 1808. It's going to create the electoral college system, where instead of having a popular vote to determine presidential election, each state would get a number of electors, and then that's how they would get population or get votes for the president. Now, when they're going to debate the Constitution, this is where a lot of the fight comes in. We have two sides. We have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists want a strong central government. They support the Constitution, whereas the Anti-Federalists want strong states. They want to oppose the Constitution. And so a big reason why the Anti-Federalists oppose the Constitution is because there is no Bill of Rights in the Constitution. They say there's nothing in the Constitution that protects people's individual rights, things that would have come out of the Enlightenment. Can you hear David crying? If you can't, he's crying. Anyway. So the Federalists, they make an agreement saying, okay, if you pass and ratify the Constitution, we promise to make a Bill of Rights that will say specifically things that the federal government can't do. And so they do that, they make the agreement, and so they pass the Bill of Rights after ratification, things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, protections if you're accused of a crime, and so on. Okay. The debates are going to go on for the next few months, because then it goes back to the states and they have to agree to it. Eventually, states will, one by one, agree to the Constitution. The last couple states, like North Carolina and Rhode Island, they agreed to the new government after the Constitution was ratified, basically saying like, okay, I guess we do it. We're going to be a part of this new government because we don't have a choice. So, so what does the government under the Constitution look like? Um, what's similar and different between this and the Articles of Confederation? It's going to let's see. I'll make same. Oops. Different. There's still a legislature. Now there's a president. There is more power to central government. There is federalism, where for some things states have power, and other things the federal government has the power. And we see that the federal government isn't going to be able to deal with the problems of our new government now after things like the Whiskey Rebellion, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay. Shaping a new republic. So throughout this time period, there's going to be a lot of conflict among people. This is kind of going back in time a little bit, but we'll talk this whole time period. We discussed how there was debate over people living in the backcountry. They're kind of fighting with everybody, whether it's people back on the coast fighting with Native Americans, or even fighting with the Spanish who are in North America. And as people begin to move further west, there's more and more conflict and competition over this land. We have things like the Treaty of Grenville, where Native Americans allow Americans to settle certain parts of Ohio. We have the French Revolution, which is going to lead to issues between trade between our two countries, which we'll talk about later. And then we have the Spanish, who are still in Southwest America and making it difficult to use the Mississippi River. And at this point, we also have British troops who are still in certain forts near the Mississippi River out in the far west. Let's get this slide. Go down here. So for Washington, some of the things that we need to know about Washington is that one of the early conflicts is the Whiskey Rebellion. There's an excise tax on whiskey, and with this tax, whiskey distillers go and protest. And when this happens, Washington, who is the President of the United States, he is going to take out the army and basically meet this rebellion head on. And when the rebels find out that Washington's coming with the army, they run away. They end pretty quickly. Washington is also going to use the military to fight against Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. That led to things like the Treaty of Greenville, which I mentioned before. We don't need to talk about that. The only other thing I want to talk about when it comes to Washington's presidency is there's conflict between the United States and European powers. Because remember, both Britain and France want us to join with them. By this time, both sides are impressing our soldiers. They're stopping our trading of our ships. And so Washington sends John Jay to go to Great Britain to sign some treaty to get the British to stop seizing our ships. However, there's little that they can do for that. But through Jay's Treaty, they do things like get the British out of the forts out west. So it wasn't a landmark treaty that got everything Americans wanted, but it actually led to a lot of controversy, and a lot of people were upset with the treaty, including Washington. When Washington is going to leave, he is going to do his farewell address. In his farewell address, he calls for more unity, especially between different political parties that are being created in the United States. He says that if we have a permanent foreign alliance with other countries, that could lead to more conflict and us being brought into more conflict than we would want in the United States. We'll get to John Adams in a bit. I'm actually going to go down to the next part down here. I want to talk a little bit about the economic system that Hamilton is going to create. So Hamilton's idea of what we should do, part of it is assumption of debt. So the national government should take all the debt from states from the Revolutionary War, and it should become part of the national debt that the country will pay back. Not everyone in Congress agrees to this. States that said, "Hey, we already paid off our bills," they get mad that they paid off their loans, and now other states are going to get paid for them. Another big part of his plan is the Bank of the United States, which many people many anti-federalists like Jefferson do not like, because they feel like there's a lot of opportunity for corruption. They feel like this is not the plan, that Americans should just want to be farmers and should not have to worry about all this printing currency and trade and all that stuff that is ripe for abusing the poor and having the rich control everything, which is ironic because Jefferson and Madison are plantation owners where they're taking advantage of slaves and free labor. Anyway. And he also believes in excise taxes. So an excise tax is a tax on a specific good, like whiskey. They don't do income taxes at this time. They do property taxes in some cases, but that's mostly state government still. So really the only way that the national government can make money is through excise taxes, make money through the Bank of the United States, and through tariffs of other countries. So it is not easy for the national government to make a lot of money. Okay. With Hamilton's economic plan and their ideas of who we should join up with in the fight between England and France, it leads to the solidification of the Federalists as a political party, and the Anti-Federalists becoming the Democratic Republicans led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And by the time that John Adams becomes president in 1796, those political parties are becoming very contentious and to the point where they can't even work well together at all. I'm just gonna make sure I'll talk about Adams here on this slide. So Adams' presidency, Adams gets kind of roped in. He was one of the founding fathers. He is, one of the men who argued for the Declaration of Independence. He went to England to try to get French alliances during the war, and when he comes back, people say, they kind of see him as, oh, you are one of those leaders, and so they elect him to be president. But he's not a political party guy. He's not a guy who says, the Federalist Party is really important, and what does the Federalist Party want? He really wants what's best for Americans. And when he becomes president, the situation is so different in America, in the political landscape. The conflicts between the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists are so brazen, especially over the conflict of what should America do with Europe, because Democratic Republicans are saying we should align ourselves with France because we promised to after the war, and we should fight against Britain, and the Federalists are saying the opposite. Eventually, we try to go to France and try to talk to them about stopping our soldiers, because they were stopping our sailors as they went across the sea and then pressing them. And that leads to the XYZ affair, where our negotiator was supposed to talk to a French negotiator, but instead they were met by three men nicknamed X, Y, and Z, and they demanded some money in order to meet with him. And the American said no, they weren't going to do that. And so this led to more conflict and more public being upset with the French that they would demand something like this. This leads to what's called the quasi-war, or fake war, or half war, where we are just upset with France. We could go to war if we wanted to, but we don't. We think our neutrality is important, and so we're not going to fight in this war, but we're just going to be upset with France for a while. This also is going to lead to probably the most important laws that are passed during Adams' presidency, the Alien and Sedition Acts. So this is actually targeted towards political enemies. So they knew that there was a bunch of pro-French immigrants who would come to the United States. And so there's this fear that these pro-French immigrants could turn the election or turn the political landscape. And so the Alien Acts made it more difficult for immigrants coming to the United States, and also for those immigrants to become citizens, so voting citizens. And that's the Alien Acts. And then there's the Sedition Acts, which makes it the ability for Congress to, or for the government to put someone in jail who's a newspaper editor or who's in the media, who reports something or says something that could be determined as against false, scandalous, and malicious speech against the government, which I think it'd be pretty easy to argue that this is against freedom of speech and freedom of press. But many people were thrown in jail. Some Democratic Republicans were so outraged by this, they passed the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which said that if they feel like a law is unconstitutional, which they thought Alien and Sedition Acts were, that they should not have to follow it. And so this is going to be one of the first times where we see the national government and state government go into this conflict, where we're going to see this trail off into things like the nullification crisis, and obviously secession in the 1860s. And I'm going to skip culture. How about that? And I already talked about movement. As more Americans are moving further west, it's going to lead to more conflict between Americans and the Native Americans who are there. There's going to be conflict between the United States and the Shawnees, between the Iroquois, between the Miami and Ohio. And all of that, many Native Americans would move further west or would move north into Canada to deal with Great Britain. And all of that is going to lead to more conflict between the United States and Great Britain, that many Native Americans are starting to align and side themselves with Great Britain. Slavery is also going to get more of a push during this time period, but also in northern states where they don't have as high a need for labor as in the South. There's more anti-slavery sentiment beginning to grow, and in some states they've already abolished slavery completely. And that's it for Unit 3. Okay, so there's a lot there for Unit 3. If you have any questions, please email me. This is just one way I thought I could go through the unit. If that's helpful, great. If it's not, if you would like it in a different way, if you want me just like to type up things like I would normally write up on the front whiteboard, I can do that too. This is just one way I thought might be helpful, and another way I could just go through things and hopefully not forget things. So that'll be it for the Unit 3 review. Make sure if you haven't done it yet, you take the Unit 3 multiple choice test on AP Classroom. I think it's only like 25 questions. It's not too bad, but it's just a good review and preparation for the national exam. I think that's it for me. If you have any questions, just email me. I'm going to get back to touring Independence Hall here and maybe go in and go see the Liberty Bell. So I'll see you later. Bye, everybody.